Hebrews chapter 4, verse 12, we're going to spend a bit of time talking about combat-related stuff, but that's not where we're going to stay. I just want to lay a foundation and move on to our main thought from there. Hebrews 4:12, for the word of God is quick and powerful, sharper than any two-edged sword, piercing even to the dividing asunder of soul and spirit, and of the joints and marrow, and is a discerner of the thoughts and intents of the heart. So obviously when we read different things in the New Testament, God is equating being a Christian to being a soldier. We see that theme play itself out many times, and so we're talking about a two-edged sword, which brings us automatically to the Roman soldiers. So it's a very powerful description. But I want to focus on this whole word of thoughts with regards to the sword and being in combat and being in battle. And it reminds me of a movie that I watched years and years ago. The movie was called The Last Samurai, and there's a scene in that movie where the character is fighting against a Japanese samurai. It's taken place, 100 and some years ago, back before the modern world completely took over a lot of those things, and they're now simply traditions. But this particular character, the hero who wasn't Japanese, is being beaten by this other warrior in practice, and he can never seem to be able to win one of the sparring matches. And all of a sudden, one of the contestants, one of his friends, a young fellow, he ran to him when he was down on the ground. He was knocked down, and he whispered. He said, "Too many mind." And he goes, "What? Too many mind? What do you mean?" He says, "Mind people watching, mind the enemy, mind the sword. Too many mind, no mind." And then he kind of paused, and he realized what the young fellow was talking about, and he realized he was trying to figure things, and he just kind of calmed down, and he collected himself, and you know how they do it in the movies. And actually, I've had this very thing happen to me in golf, believe it or not. And everything kind of calms down just before you're going to do something, and then it slows down, and then they do the music, and then he goes, and it's slow motion, and then he does it, and he beats the guy. And it was amazing, it was really something. But when he stepped out of himself, all the distractions that he had in his own mind, he was able to accomplish the purpose that was at stake right at that particular moment. This idea is actually in the New Testament. In 2 Corinthians chapter 10, verses 3 to 5, we read through the King James Version, "So though we walk in the flesh, we do not war after the flesh. For the weapons of our warfare are not carnal, but mighty through God to the pulling down of strongholds." And here's the too many mind part. "Casting down imaginations and every high thing that exalteth itself against the knowledge of God, and bringing into captivity every thought to the obedience of Christ." Too many mind. We have to be single-minded when we are going to do something for God. We have to be single-minded in our service to God. If you're jumping out of the boat to walk to Jesus, and if any part of you is thinking, "You know what, I can't swim," you're not going to be walking very far. You have to be of one mind to be able to do that. One of the cars out there is really enjoying this sermon. That's car talk for amen, by the way. Our very first battle was one that we lost, and it started in the mind. Our very first battle started with a very simple question: hath God said? And with those three words, doubt was planted. With those three words, it's almost as if Adam himself forgot the very conversation that he had with God about what he could do and what he couldn't do in the Garden of Eden. But you know what? Life for us as well is full of different options, full of different distractions. Many of us don't get our food from the gardens, although in Emmyville I'm fortunate enough to get fresh kale and all that stuff, the good stuff from the garden. But many of us got to go to Sobeys or Atlantic Superstore to get our foods. And I find even going to get groceries, there's all kinds of distractions. Sometimes I shop at the Sobeys on University Avenue, and even though I know why I've gotten in my car and driven to town, even though I know what my purpose is, and even though I've got a list in my pocket, I think, you know what, a Buddy Burger would be great right now. But I keep on driving past the A&W, and then a little bit farther I go, man, that new pizza place next to the UPI, they make awesome pizzas. But I keep on driving past, and then, man, I haven't had a Big Mac in forever. And I keep on driving past till I get to Sobeys and get my groceries. There's always distractions, no matter what you're doing. No wonder Paul encouraged us all to bring into captivity every thought to the obedience of Christ. Now, here's an introduction. I told you we'd be fighting for a little bit. Here's where I'm going to depart from that, but just after this here particular talk. Here's an introduction to an article on self-defense taken from the webpage military.com. Every one of you can sympathize with this. Ever been walking near some kids playing and hear, "Look out!" only to look up and see a baseball coming at your head like a little white freight train? It may have taken some other form, maybe a football, or a baseball, or a golf ball, or whatever. But most everyone has experienced this, and everyone has had the same reaction. Your eyes automatically close shut, your head turns quickly away, and your hands thrust up to protect your noggin. Does that sound familiar? Yeah. This is an instinctual survival strategy you don't need to think about to put into action. You can't stop it. And neither can your attacker in a real street defense scenario. We talk about the first strike as being a punch, a kick, etc., but rarely do people consider using distraction as a self-defense technique. That's too bad, because it works like magic for quickly gaining the offensive advantage in a fight. Now, the enemy of our souls understands this tactic quite well, which is why I have to drive by the Burger King and the Dairy Queen and the McDonald's to get to the grocery store. It's not so much of a battle for me these days, but there was a time when it really was. When it really, really was. Hebrews chapter 4 and 12 tells us, "Wherefore, seeing we are also compassed about with so great a cloud of witnesses, let us lay aside every weight and the sin which does so easily beset us. And let us run with patience the race that is set before us." Speaking about distractions, looking unto Jesus, the author and the finisher of our faith. Speaking about focusing on something and staying focused on that, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. For consider him that endured such contradiction of sinners against himself, lest ye be weary and faint in your minds. There are all kinds of distractions that will come in your path. Expect them. Be prepared for them. Don't be surprised by them. I think it was Peter that said, don't be surprised when you fall into diverse temptations. They are there. There's always a distraction. Always something to take your attention away. Always something to be afraid of. I know probably many of you have been like me when you've been listening either to a preacher, not you, Pastor Bill, or a politician, and they say something like, you know, this is the worst that it's ever been. Crime is as rampant. It's just overflowing. It's taking us over. Sin is running like, the devil is going like wildfire throughout. Sin is rampant. It's easy to say stuff like that to get our attention. Now, the older I get, the more I find myself saying, okay, What are your facts? Where did you get that information from? Because it's so easy for me to say, this is the worst. It's never been like this before. And if I would have gone down that road, I would have heard probably a couple of amens. You know, it's easy to do that. It's easy to do that. Not everything, by the way, is getting worse. Stats Canada tells us, for example, that impaired driving is down from 577 incidents per 1,000 in 1986 to 258 incidents per 1,000 in 2019. It's almost cut in half. Unfortunately, though, PEI is the worst in Canada. Yeah. The poverty rate has gone from 15% in 2012 to 10% in 2019. Homicides, unfortunately, have gone up from 569 per 100,000 in 94 to 678 in 2015. So it's one thing to say something, but it's another thing to have the information behind it. I heard a gentleman say one time in a meeting, and he said, without the data, the chatter don't matter. And that's true. Now, speaking of statistics, I also heard somebody say, you know what, 34.352% of all statistics are made up right on the spot. Just like that one was. But you see, folks, whatever you might hear when you turn on the news, whatever channel you listen to, whatever you might hear when you read something, there's really nothing new under the sun. This is not the worst time. It's not even perhaps the best time. It's just our time. And it's unique to us. You might not be going through the worst trouble of anybody else. You might not be suffering through the worst pain of anybody else, but you're going through your time, your trouble. And it just seems worse than anybody else's because it's yours and you can feel it. I can remember years ago, from time to time when I was flipping through the channels, back when we had cable, and you flip through channels, and there was this preacher that was on every week on radio, and you can get him every day if you had cable, and he had a lot of good things to say. But more than a couple of times, I remember him saying, you know, something to the effect of, you know, while I was in prayer this week, God has revealed to me something so important, so critical, so necessary to the church of God to know, and I love you so much, and I want you so bad to have this information. Take your phone right now and call our 1-800 number, and for a gift of $20, I will send you my book. And I used to always think, I'm here, I'm watching you right now. If it's so important, tell me now. But no, he was just saying that because he wanted to affect my action. He wanted me to pick up the phone and dial that 800 number and make that donation. It's so easy for him to say that was the most critical. How many times have you done that, right? You've ordered something and this was the best, and you get it and it's like, whoa, that was not what they advertised at all. We all know from the world we live in that it doesn't matter if something is so. We all know from the times that we're living in now that it doesn't really matter if something is true, as long as people think it is. We all know that. And I'm not taking sides by saying that. I'm just saying that's just the fact for all of us. As long as people think it is. Even the truth can be said in such a way as to imply something different. Which reminds me of a little thing I brought up perhaps last year. It's worthwhile again. But there was a story of the ship's log, and the captain and the first mate were putting entries into the log, and the captain was not getting along with the first mate. And one day in his entry in the log, he writes, the first mate was 5 minutes late to his post today, which was true. The first mate, then once it's entered into the log, it's not like a computer, you can just go delete, 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 delete. No, it was in there, it was written. And the first mate saw that, and he didn't really like that. It kind of ticked him off because he was only late because the captain gave him something extra to do before he got to his post. And he knew the captain was riding him. So the next morning, when the first mate went to enter his entry was, the captain was sober all day today. Which was true. But the captain was never drunk at work. But you see how you can say something that's true, and you can divert somebody's attention, make them go someplace else, right? The point I'm making here is that there are a lot of things that can get our minds off of what really matter. There's a lot of bad news flying around today. There's a lot of scary things in the world today. There's a lot of things that could cause us to lose heart, to lose faith, to lose hope. Here's a bit of perspective from Ecclesiastes. He said, "What has been will be again. What has been done will be done again. There's nothing new under the sun." That was the foundation. Now, remember a samurai warrior? He was trained. He was dedicated. And he was disciplined. But he was distracted, and you might think by what was around him. No. He was distracted by what was in him. There's always going to be a sword. There's always going to be an enemy. And most of the time, there's going to be somebody watching. But he was distracted by what was inside him. Too many mind. You see, in order for him to succeed, he had to sink into his training, to go within himself and just let everything else go into the background, fade into the background. And then he could fight with instinct, without distraction. Do you know that it's been said that in order to achieve mastery in something, you have to put in 10,000 hours of practice? In order to make something look easy, you have to work really, really hard. Once you master something, it looks effortless. You can stop trying to figure things out and just rely on what's already inside of you. You know, that's an obvious thing. And here's another obvious fact. As the athletes are flying to Japan for the Olympics that are going to be held without spectators this year, I think, if they're going to be held at all. But as those athletes from all around the world are flying to Japan, none of the athletes that will be partaking in this year's Olympics are there on God-given talent alone. Every single one of them has trained a lot. Yes, they might have a knack for it. Yes, they might have God-given talent. But every single one of them trained for years and dedicated their lives to it. In Corinthians, Paul writes, Corinthians chapter 9, verse 24 to 25, "Do you not know that in a race all the runners run, but only one gets a prize?" And he tells us, "Run in such a way as to get the prize. Everyone who competes in the games goes into strict training. They do it to get a crown that will not last, but we do it to get a crown that will last forever." No wonder Paul wrote to young Timothy, "Study to show thyself approved unto God, a workman that needeth not be ashamed, rightly dividing the word of truth." Mirroring the first scripture I read today, the word of God is quick and powerful, sharper than any two-edged sword, rightly dividing between soul and spirit, joint and marrow. Paul says to Timothy, if you want to wield that sword, you have got to practice with it. If you want to use that word effectively, you have got to study it. There's a great line in a movie called Braveheart, where there was an old fellow. He was sharpening his sword, and there was a young guy looking at him, and he said, "I'd like to be able to use the sword." And the old fellow looked over and he said, No. First, you'll learn how to use this, and then I'll teach you to use this." You've got to put the work in. You've got to put the work in. And no matter whether you're an ancient warrior or a soldier of the cross, you have to put in the time. You have to do the training to be able to rightly divide the word of truth. You've got to give something to God for him to use. Whether you're Elisha, asking the widow in 2 Kings chapter 4, "What shall I do for thee? Tell me, what hast thou in the house?" And she answered, "Nothing except a pot of oil." Elisha says, "I'm going to help you. What do you got? Give me something. I have to have something to work with here." Or whether you're Jesus wanting to feed the 5,000. Where we read in Matthew chapter 14, where his disciple says, "We have here but 5 loaves and 2 fishes. And Jesus said, "Bring them to me. I'll use that to feed the 5,000. God says to us today, "Do you want me to use you? Give me something to work with." I mean, look at nature. An oak tree comes from an acorn. A garden comes from a handful of seeds. In our property in Emmyville, I didn't plant them. We planted 17,000 trees. 17,000. Can't see one of them. They're all only that high. The grass is that high. But they're there. They're growing. Hopefully someday I'll walk through them, right? God says, you got to give me something. It doesn't matter what it is sometimes. It doesn't take very much, even if it's only the widow's mite. But it seems that God requires something of us if he can do anything with us. You know, I don't think it's a coincidence at all that God used Paul the Apostle to write the most systematic, the most logical, the most powerful arguments in the New Testament found in Galatians and Romans. I don't think it's a coincidence at all that that's the man who describes himself by saying this: "I'm a Jew born in Tarsus, but brought up in Jerusalem. I studied under Gamaliel." What's the equivalent of that today, Bob? "I grew up in Boston and studied at Harvard University." That's the equivalent, because Gamaliel was the most respected Jewish scholar of the day. He said, "I studied under Gamaliel and was thoroughly trained in the law of our ancestors." I don't think it's any mistake. I don't think it's any coincidence that that was the man that God used to write Romans and Galatians. What is God going to use you for? Pastor Bill is talking about the changes that are coming, how God is going to move and how he's going to use us. Well, okay, if God is going to use us, what are we doing to prepare for it? If God is going to use you, what are you doing to prepare for it? If anyone had any distractions in life, and you'll have your distractions, it was Paul the Apostle. He writes in Corinthians chapter 11, 5 times I received from the Jews 40 lashes minus 1. 3 times I was beaten with rods. Once I was pelted with stones. 3 times I was shipwrecked. I spent a night and a day in the open sea. I have been constantly on the move. I have been in danger from rivers, in danger from bandits, in danger from my fellow Jews, in danger from Gentiles, in danger in the city, in danger in the country, in danger at sea, and in danger from false believers. I have labored and toiled and have often gone without sleep. I have known hunger and thirst and have often gone without food. I have been cold and I've been naked. Paul knew what he was talking about when he told young Timothy, endure hardship. He knew what he was talking about. Now Paul, even though he'd gone all through that, and he had the training, the best that there was, he had distractions, the worst that there were. But he did not let his training or his many distractions and hardships get in the way of his service to God. He lets us know, I am crucified with Christ. My training is there, and it's important, but it's not what gets me through. Yes, I'm strong and I'm single-minded because I've gone through all these tough things, but that's not what's going to get me through. He knew where his source was. He said, I'm crucified with Christ. So that brings me to the point where I want to say this. There's two areas that can hinder our being led by the Spirit in our daily lives. There's two areas that can hinder us from having God use us as a church. Even if we have done our part in preparation of our service for God, and even if we've endured hardship because of our service with God. First of all, we can be distracted by the events around us. We could, in fact, believe this is the worst of times and be all upset about it and be all put off by it and off balance by it. Because there's always something bad going to come around. There always will be. This pandemic's been bad. 4 million people have died. 100 years ago, 20 million people died. It isn't the first time this has happened in the world. There'll be another one. It won't be the last. And there's all kinds of challenges and struggles that are smaller than that come right down to my very existence, my personal experience. Things are, we got to make sure that we don't believe that things are so bad that we possibly couldn't have any impact on those that are around us. I remember traveling from different places, and I remember going and you know, I traveled with an evangelist for a while when I was younger. And he had an airplane, and we flew from different places, mostly down in the States. And more than once, the pastor picked us up, and on the way to the back to town, he'd say, you know, this is a tough place, man. This is a tough Harborsfield. The devil's really strong in here, and I haven't been able to put a dent in it for 25 years. Lowered expectations. Right? It's easy when we look at how things, you know, if we listen to some people to think, well, what good could I do? Right? All of us, though, have distractions. All of us have things that might cause us to have too many mind. Fortunately, we don't have a samurai warrior trying to kill us. Our trials and our distractions tend to be much more mundane. I used to like to watch this. You'd think I spent all my time watching TV, wouldn't you? Don't forget, though, I'm drawn from 50 years. A British TV series I used to love watching called Keeping Up Appearances. Anybody remember that one? Hyacinth. Everything had to be perfect with Hyacinth and her poor husband Richard. And she was always after him. And they'd be driving down the road, in the country road, and she'd go, mind the car, Richard. And another car would be going by, yes, dear. And a little bit, mind the cows, Richard. You know, Richard couldn't even go for a drive and enjoy a simple ride in the country because he had a distraction sitting next to him, no matter where he goes. When I was younger, I used to play this simulation racing game, and one of the tracks was the Indianapolis 500 Speedway. You might not have heard of it, but that's where they have the Indy 500. They're basically a giant oval, and cars would race each other bumper to bumper, going 200 miles an hour. And I'd be going down, you know, in my simulation rig, and I'd be going, and I could see the wall coming where the big curve was, and I'd be looking at that wall, thinking, "Don't hit the wall! Don't hit the wall! Don't hit the wall!" Bang! Right into the wall. Every time, right into the wall. And then I read something somewhere that said, "Don't look where you don't want to go. Look where you want to go." And so I'd be going down, my foot to the accelerator as fast as I can, and I'd be looking down at that part of the curve, thinking, don't hit the wall, don't hit the wall. Bang! I'd hit the wall. Just not as often. Just not as often. You see, that's where skill and training comes in. You need to have skill, and you need to have some training. You know, whatever our distractions, be they petty ones, like Richard had to deal with, or huge ones, like the Apostle Paul lived through, we all must learn to look unto Jesus, the author and the finisher of our faith. The second area I want to bring our attention to is this. No matter how much we might study, no matter how much we might pray, no matter how much we might prepare, no matter how much time and effort we might put into our walk with God, in our relationship with God, we cannot put our faith in our abilities alone. Like anyone who's ever been to an AA meeting knows that you got to do all the stuff, you've got to go to the meetings, but you also have to depend on a higher power. Because you're not going to make it on your own. And again, we take our instructions from Paul the Apostle in 2 Corinthians chapter 12. But he said unto me, my grace is sufficient for you. God is talking about, Paul is talking about what God said to him. For my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore, Paul says, I will boast all the more gladly about my weaknesses, so that Christ's power may rest on me. That is why, for Christ's sake, I delight in weaknesses, in insults, in hardships, in persecutions, and in difficulties. For when I am weak, then am I strong. So no matter how much preparation, no matter whether or not I went to Bible school, no matter whether or not I've been trained as a soldier, no matter whether or not I pray more than ye all, I'm obviously not talking about myself here, no matter whether or not I'm a Bible scholar, no matter any of that, no matter whether or not I'm the best musician or the best singer, no matter any of that, they that labor in vain unless the Lord build the house. Amen? There's nothing more shallow than somebody, you know, the story of the young preacher that was given a chance to preach. And he prepared. He had a month to get ready, and he did everything he could. The senior pastor was letting him preach. I know you probably heard this story before, but bears repeating. And he got ready, and when it was time, the pastor announced for him, and he got up just as proud as could be, and he walked up to that platform just as confident, because he's studying. He had 1 year in Bible school, and let me tell you, nobody knows more about the Bible than somebody with 1 year of Bible school training, and they know everything. And he walked up there, and he opened his Bible, and he opened up his notes, and he completely bombed. And he humiliated himself, and he closed up, and he kind of slunk back down to his seat. And the senior pastor got up, and he looked down and said, you know something, son? If you'd have come up here like you went down there, you'd have went down there like you came up. You know, we got to put our trust in Him. We got to put our trust in Him. My power is made perfect in weakness. So we've got to remember, except the Lord build the house, they that labor in vain. Yes, we have to do our part. Yes, we can depend on God to do His part, but we got to realize that we need Him. We depend on His wisdom, not our own. And that's what Jesus was talking about when He said, but when they arrest you, do not worry about what to say or how to say it. At that time you will be given what to say, for it will not be you speaking, but the Spirit of your Father speaking through you. Don't take that to mean that you never have to do any studying on your own. Don't take that to mean that you never have to do any training on your own. That's not what He's talking about. He's saying if you do the work, when the time has come, I will reach into you, out of your innermost being. I'll reach in and I will pull it out of you. God will take what you have. He needs something, whether it's a little bit of oil. He needs something, whether it's five loaves and 2 fishes. He needs something. He will take what you have and He will multiply it. You don't really think that David slew Goliath on his own, do you? Does anybody really believe that? God helped him in the same way He helped the widow. She had a bit of oil, and he, that little shepherd boy, he had a sling that he knew how to use. How many well, I don't know if they had tin cans back then, but how many sticks did he knock down? How many birds did he kill with that sling in the backyard? Right? Hundreds of them. Hundreds of them. You see, when we take what we have and we give it to God and we put our trust in Him, we can be assured that He will lead us. You know, folks, it's not an easy thing. It's not an easy thing to do the work when no one's looking. And it's also not an easy thing to not depend on your own strength, on your own training. To get out of the way and let the work that's been done when no one's watching, to get out of the way and let God lead you. It's not a simple thing to be led by the Spirit in some ways. You see, fellowship with God, it cannot be taken for granted. Adam learned that the hard way, didn't he? We must develop this. We have to be sensitive to the leading of the Spirit. Remember the lesson about the mind. Because we don't always know when Jesus shows up. My mind goes to Mary in the garden in John chapter 20. And he asked her, Mary, woman, why are you crying? Who is it you are looking for? Thinking he was the gardener. She said, Sir, they have taken him away. If you know where he is, tell me, and I will go to him. We don't always know when he shows up, even when we're looking for him. Also, we don't always know when he's actually with us. These people are not dropouts here. This is Mary. These next two are the two disciples walking on the way to Emmaus, Luke chapter 24. And as they talked and discussed these things with each other, Jesus himself came up and walked along with them. But they were kept from recognizing him. See, we don't always know sometimes when he's with us. And also, third, we don't always know when he's left us. We read in Judges chapter 16 about Samson. And he awoke from his sleep and thought, I'll go as before and shake myself free. But he did not know that the Lord had left him. It's not something you can take for granted, having a relationship with God. Many married couples have found that out. They got busy with careers, they got busy with kids, they got busy with whatever it might be. And after the work is done, and after the kids are left, there's two strangers looking across each other at the kitchen table. You've got to nurture that relationship. You've got to develop it, regardless of the distractions that are in your everyday life. Being led by the Spirit is not something that can be taken for granted. Being led by the Spirit needs to be nurtured over time. I'm almost done. Romans chapter 8, verses 5 to 9. Paul pens these words. For those who live according to the flesh have their minds set on what the flesh desires. But those who live according to the Spirit have their minds set on what the Spirit desires. The mind governed by the flesh is death. Especially if you're a samurai warrior, right? But the mind that is governed by the Spirit is life and peace. The mind governed by the flesh is hostile toward God. It does not submit to God's law, nor can it do so. Those who are in the realm of the flesh cannot please God. You, however, are not in the realm of the flesh, but are in the realm of the Spirit, if indeed the Spirit of God lives in you. And so I challenge you, and I admonish you this morning, and I admonish myself, do all that you can to prepare for whatever it is that's going to be along your path. And when the time comes, put your trust in Him, and He will direct your paths, and He will use your skill, and He will multiply what you have put into it. You can be confident in that. And when you're in the midst of the battle, when you're in the midst of the storm, you can remember these words of Jesus. Peace I leave with you. My peace I give to you. I do not give to you as the world gives. Do not let your hearts be troubled, and be not afraid.